Welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Thursday, April 25th, the 14-year anniversary of the largest peaceful appeal in China's modern history. European lawmakers condemn rights abuses at this labor camp. And state-run media tells reporters to stay out of the Sichuan earthquake disaster zone. 14 years ago on this day, April 25th, around 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners peacefully gathered outside the compound of China's Communist Party leaders in Beijing. They wanted the right to freely practice their belief in truthfulness, compassion and tolerance, as they did since 1992. But several months later, a widespread persecution began, and it's lasted until today. But there may be signs that things are changing.
Standing on a sidewalk, reading books, doing Qigong exercises, this is the site of an appeal outside China's government headquarters, Zhongnanhai. On April 25, 1999, an estimated 10,000 practitioners of the Falun Gong spiritual practice gathered silently outside the compound. They were appealing against a seemingly sudden suppression by authorities.
I simply thought that it was wrong for the police to arrest people just because they practice truth, compassion, and tolerance. It was wrong for sure, so I had to go to the appeal. I said I was going.
Their request was simple: release detained practitioners and allow Falun Gong to be freely practiced in China. Their requests were initially granted, but what ensued was a persecution that went far beyond anyone's expectations.
Most people think this is the event that created the persecution. Falun Gong had the audacity to surround the central leadership, and so the persecution started because of that. Actually, that wasn't true. There's a lot of evidence to indicate the leaders were building up to suppress Falun Gong for even years before that.
Shortly after this, at least 70 million Falun Gong practitioners became subjects of a systematic persecution headed by former Communist Party chief Jiang Zemin. According to the Falun Dafa Information Center, practitioners make up the largest group of prisoners of conscience in Chinese labor camps today. 59-year-old Wan Chongying was arrested in 2002 for practicing Falun Gong. She was held at the Masanjia labor camp in Liaoning province for more than 5 years.
2 male police, Zhang Liang and Peng Tao, dragged me to confinement in a small room and hung me up.
On April 6, Chinese state-run Lens magazine ran an exposé on the inhumane treatment of inmates at Masanjia, not mentioning Falun Gong. It prompted an investigation by Liaoning officials, which many discredited because of its biased team. While the investigation denied the claims made in Lens magazine, it made a surprising admission.
Yeah, their investigative report mentioned Falun Gong, said this is all the Falun Gong's slam to Masanjia labor camp, but at least they admitted Masanjia was used for persecution of Falun Gong. That actually, the last paragraph about Falun Gong they described actually make people believe that torture really happened.
While the Lens magazine article was shortly removed, Masanjia's exposure could be a sign that the political winds are changing. Cases of both individuals and groups standing up for Falun Gong practitioners have also recently increased.
But clearly there are people in China that are ready and willing to expose the persecution of Falun Gong, and that's never been the case before.
Holly Kellum, NTD News.
And now the first group of lawmakers outside of China has condemned the abuse at the Masanjia labor camp. Our team in Brussels, Belgium, brings us this next story.
Electric shock, force-feeding, tiger bench, these and more accounts of torture at the notorious Masanjia women's labor camp were published by Lens magazine in China on April 6. Days later, the original piece was removed from the internet. It was the first report from inside China exposing atrocities in labor camps. The piece was immediately picked up by the media in the West, like the New York Times and the Associated Press. European politicians and human rights organizations have reacted strongly.
I think this is one more very, very dramatic indication of what is going on there. That's why it's so important to have an adequate information and picture what is happening in China. We in Europe, in America, we know actually very little.
The expose about abuse at Masanjia admitted one fact, that the majority of the inmates are Falun Gong practitioners. The Chinese regime launched an extrajudicial persecution campaign against the meditation practice in 1999, and the crackdown has been extensive.
Well, the estimates are that between 7 and 8 million people are in Laogai, or re-education through labour, in China. That is an enormous number. The former UN rapporteur for torture, Manfred Novak, believed that about 3/4 of those undergoing re-education through labour in China were Falun Gong practitioners.
Re-education involves forcing Falun Gong adherents to renounce the practice. Most commonly, this is done through physical and mental torture.
It is unacceptable, and the torturers must be prosecuted. So it's important for NGOs to collect information not only about people who were tortured, but also about the torturers, so that a blacklist of torturers could be established, and Chinese authorities could be challenged with such a list.
European lawmakers say the EU should file a complaint with the international community to help stop the human rights violations. One says the basis of the complaint is serious. It's genocide.
Because the regime is corrupt, the regime has tortured many people, and I have seen a list of more than 3,500 people, all Falun Gong practitioners, who died under torture. Under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, that is genocide.
On Wednesday, the European Union's top foreign policy official, Catherine Ashton, made her first official visit to China. Rights groups like Human Rights Watch are urging her to use the opportunity to raise the gruesome human rights violations there. NTD News, Brussels.
And in other news from China, 2 earthquakes have struck Sichuan province days after a magnitude 6.6 quake hit Lushan County in Ya'an City. The latest tremors, measuring 4.8 and 4.2, struck Yibing City early this morning. Yibing is around 300 miles away from Lushan. State-run CCTV says so far 61 people have been injured. And meanwhile, the earthquake recovery efforts continue in Lushan County. As residents wait for aid material, the general public is also looking for information. But authorities have told reporters not to go to the disaster zone. Instead, they can just rely on information given to them through official channels.
Chinese authorities have ignited a debate over the role of reporters in the aftermath of the Sichuan earthquake. On Wednesday, state-run People's Daily issued a commentary saying reporters should not travel to the quake zone. It warned them against disturbing relief efforts and claims the government will provide sufficient information on the earthquake. The problem is less and less people are willing to trust official sources.
When it's information issued by state-run media, I feel it should be questioned. Without other media reports to verify certain claims, I think the public will not be willing to trust a lot of official information.
A former news editor from China also says more than just state-controlled media is needed to provide the right balance of quake-related information.
Reporters providing updates on the disaster should not be considered as a disruption. Reporting about the true state of events will keep people informed because people want to know what's happening. It'll also add transparency to relief efforts.
Earlier this week, veteran Sichuan activist Huang Qi told NTD that he and other volunteers were barred from entering the quake zone to volunteer with aid efforts. Huang had investigated poor building construction in 2008 when a magnitude 8 quake brought down numerous school buildings in Wenchuan, Sichuan province, killing students.
And coming up after the break, the United States gives assurances to Japan about its ties with China. Southeast Asian countries come together on the South China Sea dispute. And Shen Yun Performing Arts continues its 2013 tour in New York. And welcome back. Japan has raised the ire of its Asian neighbors after 169 of its lawmakers visited a wartime memorial on Tuesday. The Yasukuni Shrine commemorates those fallen during World War II, including soldiers as well as leaders indicted for war crimes. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson addressed this issue today. She said that if Japan did not renounce its wartime history, then, quote, there will be no future for Japan's relations with its Asian neighbors. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did not visit the shrine himself, but sent an offering in its place. This and the other lawmakers' visits have prompted protests in South Korea. Both South Korea and China were subject to Japan's wartime aggression. Lawmakers' regular visits to the controversial shrine have caused political upheaval in the past. With tensions between China and Japan running deep, the United States has today reassured that even with its pursuit of closer ties with China, it won't come at the expense of its Japanese relations.
The U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is in Japan after a 5-day visit to China. And to U.S. troops stationed in Japan, his message was clear.
Would we trade off our relationship with Japan in order to have a stronger relationship with China? The answer is no.
The U.S. is seeking to strengthen ties with China, one of the largest powers in the Asia-Pacific region. But along with pledges from both sides to deepen cooperation on issues like trade in North Korea are underlying tensions and competing interests in the region. The Chinese regime and Japan have been locked in a territorial dispute over a string of islands in the East China Sea, known as the Senkaku Islands in Japan and the Diaoyu Islands in China. According to a post-World War II treaty with the U.S., the islands are under Japanese control. But tempers have flared on both sides, with neither Japan nor China backing down.
And that's the point I made to the Chinese. Look, I do want a better relationship with you, but don't make this an either-or for the United States.
A security treaty with the U.S. commits the United States to aiding Japan in the event of an attack. And with the U.S. military pivot to the region, conflict of interest between the U.S. and China will most certainly rise.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations has just wrapped up 2 days of meetings in Brunei. Last year, talks at the same summit fell apart because of the South China Sea disputes with China. Things went better for ASEAN this time, with a consensus reached after the summit.
Southeast Asian nations say they will come together to reach a consensus over the territorial disputes with the Chinese regime. This was the agreement after a regional summit concluded in Brunei today. The 2-day summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, focused largely on the South China Sea disputes. Philippine President Benigno Aquino welcomed the discussions, noting a change from last year's summit. Last year, the host country Cambodia was accused of trying to please China by discouraging talks over the territorial row.
We should really be thankful that in the whole of the ASEAN is willing to discuss this instead of putting it on the back burner. I think it's already a help.
The Chinese regime claims most of the South China Sea as its own. Neighbors including the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Malaysia all have competing claims. Since last year, the Chinese regime has maintained a naval presence in the Scarborough Shoal, a rocky outcropping near the Philippines. Countries in the region have accused the regime of aggravating tensions while refusing arbitration. ASEAN has been trying to work out a code of conduct with China over the disputed waters to prevent tensions from escalating. Heads of state have called on China to engage in talks. So far, the regime has insisted settling disputes through bilateral discussions with individual countries. Talks at the ASEAN summit last year broke down, with the group failing to issue a joint communiqué for the first time in history. The communiqué after Thursday's meeting made no new announcement on the code of conduct.
And lastly today, Shen Yun Performing Arts finished its 5th show at New York's Lincoln Center on Wednesday. Its soprano vocalist astounded a New York actor, singer, choreographer. Here's more.
After watching Shen Yun Performing Arts, a New York actor, singer, choreographer raves about Shen Yun's soprano.
Soprano is absolutely amazing. What a powerful voice. She has such a presence, both vocally and her whole persona is beautiful. The operatic style of both of the music and of the singing was very, very bel canto Italian, very traditional Italian opera, it was very nice to hear that too, because I just find that music so lush, and the style of it was beautiful. The finale with the big Buddha was beautiful. I was really impressed by the effect at the end as the as they went down on their knees, and it built up onto the screen and went on into the millions and millions. I mean, it seemed to go on forever. That was an amazing effect.
Shen Yun will continue to perform in Lincoln Center until Sunday, April 28th. NTD News, New York.
And that's all for this broadcast of NTD China News. For more of our China content, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is China Focus with Shali Zhang. Stay tuned.